The ridge above Blind Frog Ranch kept its secrets the way old bones keep their silence, patient, cool, and indifferent to the passing of seasons. Morning fog unstitched itself from the arroyo and drifted up the slope, thinning into a gauze that revealed the land in increments, a tangle of mesquite, a scatter of sun-bleached rock, a single leaning fence post that had outlived the ranch hand who last hammered it. The discovery began as a slip of dark glass half buried in goat's gourd soil, the kind of thing that could have been mistaken for modern trash if not for the way the sun caught the edge and turned it sharp as a razor. Obsidian, in an oasis of dirt and bone and late summer heat, looked like an accusation. It lay in a scatter, dozens of flaked triangles and crescents, their edges still feathered with the pressure that had shaped them. Nearby, the earth held a different language. Tiny, round, dull gray beads of lead, pitted with oxidation and stamped with the faint evidence of fire. They were musket balls, each one a little wound in the ground, a map leading backward to a moment when things had hurt enough to require this kind of ordnance. No one at Blind Frog remembered the ridge being anything but wasted land and coyotes. The ranch's history, told in ledger pages and cold storage receipts, spoke of cattle, drought, and one lost well. It said nothing about pitched conflict, no columns in the county paper, no grave markers tucked between rocks. Still, the objects held together under a careful archaeologist's hand, the obsidian, the musket balls, the strata of collapsed soil that suggested more than surface scatter. They told a story in silence, a story that required no eyewitness to translate. Obsidian was ceremonial and utilitarian at once. Small points meant for hunting could double as instruments of war. Their edges were extraordinarily fine, honed to a precision impossible with flint. A single fragment could slice tendon, pierce skin, and in the right number could break flesh enough to interrupt a life. Their geometry implied skill and continuity, the blade language of a people who understood how light and fracture could be channeled into a weapon. The musket balls, by contrast, were blunt statements of technology, cast, cooled, and intended to deliver concussive force over distance. They suggested a European provenance, a cultural intrusion that arrived with sails and gunpowder and a hunger that did not speak the same grammar as the obsidian. When the ridge was mapped and the artifacts plotted, a pattern emerged like slow handwriting across the dirt. Clusters of obsidian sat in arcs and fans as though marking a line of approach, the points oriented in a manner that suggested forward motion. The musket balls clustered in another zone, near a shallow depression and a scattering of charred bone. The space between the two assemblages measured less than 20 meters, a short distance that could be covered in the space of breath and panic. Between them lay a field of small depressions and trampling, hints of bodies and horses that had not been recovered because, for whatever reason, the earth had kept them close and hidden. Bones appeared in time. Not human in any tidy way to begin with, but fragments of horse rib, a scapula split along a fresh line, and a human tibia whose end had been sheared off by force of something sharp and precise. Radiocarbon suggested a date older than established memory yet younger than prehistoric stratigraphy. The timeline fit a span when ships left Iberian ports and entered coastal harbors, and when local peoples adapted old patterns to new threats. The science was reluctant to be exact, which suited the ridge's mood. Where historians demanded records, bones and glass were content to suggest. Artifacts spoke of contact, of collision. The obsidian points were stylistically consistent with highland manufacture, their napping technique passing through generational hands. The musket balls displayed spatter consistent with hand casting and a composition that spoke of early modern metallurgy. They were not trophies tucked within ceremonial catches. They were the detritus of an event in which living bodies had negotiated death and defeat. The land around Blind Frog Ranch had always been a crossroads of weather and wildness. Before fences and barbed wire, the basin drew travelers along game trails and seasonal rivers. A line of obsidian could mark an ambush or a hunting ground. Musket balls hinted at movers with carts or horses and a willingness to carry a technology heavy with smoke and thunder. When the two met, the resulting silence was not just a cessation of sound. It became an archive, an unspoken ledger of choices: to resist, to flee, to take a stand in a place where the sky opened wide and offered no shelter. Divas found 2 fragments of cloth, a button, a metal buckle flattened and fused with rust. Nothing civilized the scene into neat labels. A buckle might come from a soldier or a settler. A button might belong to someone who had learned to weave European cloth into local dress. The ridge resisted easy storytelling. It resisted being forced into the tidy narrative of conquest or assimilation, preferring truth with jagged edges. Local lore, when prodded, folded back into myth. An old woman who tended goats on the low slopes told an ambling yarn about a night when stars fell and men with black faces and white teeth fought beneath the moon. The story had the woolly texture of something passed between blankets and wind, but it named neither Aztec nor Spanish, and was more comfortable hinting than asserting. That was the way of the place. Historians could bring maps and stratified dates, chemists could analyze Li isotopes and silicon fingerprints, but the ridge would not be tamed into a single claim. It wanted instead to be read like a palimpsest, a record with itself rubbed out and rewritten. The obsidian arrowheads, once catalogued and measured, were exquisite in their smallness. Some bore microscopic polish along the hafting region, evidence of recurring use and repair. A few retained remnants of adhesive, resin matched to local flora, where the blade had been bound to a split shaft. The musket balls had impact marks consistent with striking bone and the terrace of a close-range volley. Together they outlined a tableau of tactics: a group trained in intimate, close-range violence, and another employing distance-shaping force. The juxtaposition implied strategy, not accident. Someone had chosen the ridge as battlefield, and the ridge had received the choice. Why here? Why now? The question hovered like the heat that rose off the land at noon. There were seasonal movements to consider, trade routes that had folded through the basin for centuries, the flow of flint and obsidian along those arteries, the arrival of traders with strange goods and stranger intentions. There were also, beneath everything, the pulse of survival. If game migrated through this corridor, if water pooled in the arroyo after summer storms, then control of the ridge could mean food, safety, an advantage for ambush or defense. The Spanish, with their metal and powder, thought in terms of territory that could be plastered into maps. Local warriors thought in terms of patterns and continuity that would not be erased by ink. The greatest evidence was absence as much as presence. No formal burial lay on the ridge. Victims had been removed or buried in shallow caches, maybe by allies who could not leave them exposed, or perhaps dragged into washouts and covered with sediment. The charred area contained fragmented ceramic and traces of organic fuel, not unlike what one might expect from a field hastily cremated to prevent disease or desecration. A scorched line suggested a defensive stand that had ended with fire. Somebody had not wanted the land to be hospitable afterward. As pieces came together, the narrative changed tone from archaeological puzzle to human ledger. The obsidian points, precise and small, suggested not only the presence of skilled hands, but also an economy of material. Obsidian was valuable. it had to be transported or traded. Its use in conflict indicated a willingness to sacrifice a resource that could otherwise be worked into tools and ritual objects. The musket balls, although crude, were mass-produced and expendable. When they struck, they left an imprint of a world where industry met craft in a place that might otherwise have been mere continuum. Maps drawn from the dig painted a convergence, two routes approaching the ridge from different directions, one hugging the riverbeds and canyons, another moving along a high country track. Their meeting point was the ridge itself, a place where traffic slowed and decisions were made. The human remains, incomplete and scattered, offered glimpses, a healed fracture here, a cut mark there, of lives interrupted. Tools that accompanied the bones suggested a mixed population. Some individuals wearing the marks of indigenous manufacture, others wearing imported metal, both bearing the unnerving sameness of vulnerability. The ranch hands who first found the obsidian were not scholars, and their interpretation was softer, colored by nightly beers and the kind of wonder that happens when the ordinary is disturbed. They told of a wind that smelled of copper and old rain, of coyotes that refused to approach the dig site, as if predators recognized the sacred geometry of battle. They left small offerings, a tin of coffee, a cigarette pack, not out of superstition so much as habit. People tend to place small things where they sense weight. The site accumulated human gestures, not only ancient ones.